The characteristic of Panicker as a person and a thinker before we brought on any aspect of his unique approach towards India as well as to religion in general. Despite the scarcity of information about Panikkar's personal life, we do know that his parents, Ramuni Panikkar and Carmen Alemani, were of Keralite and Catalan origin. Kerala and Catalonia, as you very well know, are two regions of Asia and Europe, India and Spain respectively, with distinctive cultural and religious underpinnings. The Orthodox Hinduism represented by Kerala and branded by a famous Indian person as the Madhouse, and the Roman Catholicism rooted in Catalonia do find a significant place in Panikkar's life and thought. As a child of Indian and Catalan Spanish parents, Panicker can claim that he belongs both to India and Catalan Spain. I said Catalan Spain. Here is a fine point. Panikkar's biological and intellectual identity seems to have undergone various phases of development. He acknowledges that it was his father who introduced him to Hinduism. But he acquired a thorough knowledge of Sanskrit under the famous Mallorcan scholar Joan Mascaro, who later became a professor at Cambridge and translated Dhammapada and Bhagavad Gita into English. Similarly, with regard to Christianity, he was instructed in his mother's Catholic faith under Jesuits in Barcelona, continued his studies in philosophy at the University of Bonn during the Spanish Civil War, thanks to the British passport he held. But he could not anymore return there due to the onset of Second World War and became associated with José María Escrivá de Balaguer, José María Escrivá de Balaguer, the last one. José María Escrivá de Balaguer, the founder of Opus Dei, a conservative but also intellectual Catholic movement, politically and socially still very influential in Spain and elsewhere. This involvement with the Opus Dei constitutes an important part of Panikkar's life, especially in his academic development and political perspectives. Perhaps you might know what Opus Dei means literally. The work of God. That is what the name says. Opus Dei. It is a social and political, we might say, intellectual movement which was a response to some of the European rationalism of that time. In 1941, Panicker graduated in chemical sciences from the University of Barcelona and in philosophy from the University of Madrid, and began working as an assistant manager at a chemical factory, more probably his own father's. And then later he became the official representative of a group of industrialists to the Spanish government and continued his postgraduate studies as well as worked as tutor at the Psychology Institute of the university. Further, Panicker was involved with the High Council of Scientific Research, mostly in the hands of the Opus Dei members and the associates. As an influential member of the delegation of this central organization in Barcelona, Panicker was able, together with others, to start a journal by name Synthesis, which later became under the name Argo, the official organ of the CSIR. of the Scientific Research Council. His first doctorate, he holds 3 doctorates. His first doctorate was a study on the concept of nature, a topic at that time also dealt with by Spanish intellectuals, especially by Xavier Zubiri. This, as well as his earlier writing, shows a concern for synthesis, integrating metaphysical questions with theology and sciences. The interdisciplinary tendency would continue all throughout his intellectual career. However, the topic studied by Panicker was treated under the title Christian philosophy. This in turn provokes the issue of the supernatural, human nature, and nature in general, in contrast to culture. So Panicker's concern for culture goes back to his first doctorate and is a response to the influential climate existed in the Europe of that time. Being still a member of the Opus Dei, Panicker was ordained priest in 1946, and then he assumed a teaching post at the University of Madrid. Panicker's encounter with India begins in the year 1954, although at times it is mentioned as 1953 because the dates, according to his brother Salvador Panicker, he went to India in December 1954. So sometimes it is mistaken as 53 or 54, we are not sure exactly. So he went to India as senior research fellow at the universities of Mysore and Varanasi. However, what occasioned it was a rift with the Opus Dei. Although Panicker himself does not tell us much of this, credible sources indicate that his critical attitude towards contemporary Christian theologies and open criticism of Christianity angered his superiors, who eventually asked him to do theology in Rome. That is to say, you study theology before you criticize me. So he went to Rome and graduated in theology in 1954, then visited briefly India, still maintaining his relationships which he has already cultivated with the then Swiss ambassador in India, Jacques-Albert Catat, and 3 other Benedictines, French, 2 of them from France and 1 from England. And especially with regard to the last person, Reed Griffiths, Panicker learned or refined his knowledge in Sanskrit. And these 3 persons are of importance because they were the ones who, in a certain sense, pioneered the so-called Hindu-Christian dialogue. And Panicker continued that. In 1958, Panicker obtained a second doctorate, now in science, from the University of Madrid. The relationship between science and reason was the topic of the doctorate. It was called Autonomy of Science. And this relationship has been of interest for Panicker all throughout his life, especially after his encounter with India. For the spirit of colonialism and the current supremacy of technology demonstrate, according to Panicker, the unilateral conception of world problems. Monocultures and rationalistic solutions do not lead to the betterment of humanity. This is a perspective, argues Panicker, supported also by the Indian thought as well as other age-old philosophies. So you know the direction he is moving to. In 1959, he was one of the 3 delegates to welcome the 14th Dalai Lama in his exile in India. And they spent considerable time together at the Himalayan Buddhist monastery of Ramtek. Panicker also held later in 1995 the Laudatio for the 60th anniversary of Dalai Lama, and this Laudatio was later published as a book. Then for 3 years he was in Rome, acting as a professor of sociology of religion at the International University of Social Sciences and the State University of Rome. This was the occasion for him actually to influence the Second Vatican Council, one of the greatest events for the Christian Church, I mean the Catholic Christian Church. And during this time, and since then, Panicker was very much occupied with Hinduism, and that was his principal concern. And the first important academic result was the now famous book, The Unknown Christ of Hinduism, which was actually presented, or the better part of which was presented as his doctoral thesis in theology, so the third doctorate. In 1964, Panicker went back to India, and from that time onwards, he gets more and more involved in the Indian government as representative, the cultural ambassador of India in Latin America. He was sent to Latin America in 1965 and 1974 in order to promote Indian culture and civilization, especially for his ability in Spanish. He did not really speak Catalan, but also Spanish, so both of the languages were practically his mother tongue. Then later he also represented the UNESCO in 1966 at the Oriental Studies Colloquium in Buenos Aires. And in India itself, he worked under the directorship of M.M. Thomas at the Institute for the Study of Religion and Society in Bangalore. M.M. Thomas, who was later in the 90s also for a short time governor of Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh. Panicker also lectured at the University of Varanasi and Mysore. All these, I say, only to point out that he was very much involved with the Indian elite. But he was also among the common people, especially as a pilgrim. And this he did together with the Benedictine monks there. Officially, Panicker was incardinated to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Varanasi. However, the discovery of India has begun to change his life in various ways. Outwardly, and it is interesting, it showed in the surname he used. Because he always used to write his name, as you will see, with P-A-N-I-K-E-R, Panicker. That is the normal way a European would pronounce the name Panicker. And Panicker, after encountering India, wanted to change the surname in order to recuperate his original identity. And it is very interesting nowadays to see that his brother, Salvador Panicker, does not want to use that. And that is one of the reasons of a rift between the brothers. You will see that in the philosophies and in all other later social associations they have. So this immediately points out how he has changed. In an interview given in German, he later tells us, "I did not go to India, my land of origin, as a teacher, but as a student. Not as someone who is already a scholar, but as a seeker. I sat without any difficulty at the feet of the master, learned the language of the people, and was one among them. It was not pre-planned. It was my karma." Around this time, in 1965, Panicker also left the Opus Dei, or according to other descriptions, he was expelled from the Opus Dei. What we actually know is that he was held captive in an Opus Dei house in Rome and was released under the behest of Pope Paul VI with a one-way ticket to India. Interestingly, Panicker was not Christian enough for the Opus Dei, but he was too Christian also for the Benares Hindu University to appoint him as a full professor. So this is the reality of life. Thereafter, Panicker was a visiting professor at Harvard, and then for a short time visiting professor at Montreal, and then later full professor at the University of California at Santa Barbara. Besides participating in international symposiums and acting as member of the editorial boards, he also continued to visit India for lectures and conferences. Most of his cross-cultural studies and books on Indian culture and civilization belong to this period. In discussing his thought, we shall be referring to some of these texts. Now, since 1986, Panicker has retired from teaching and established himself in Tavertet, Catalonia. There he married his long-time associate, Maria Carmen Tapia, in 1987, and continues his cultural involvement as much as the age permits. But he is still acting as a Catholic priest. So a few remarks before we pass on to our next topic. First, the impact of the biological lineage and the institutional associations was quite noteworthy in Panicker's thought. For he writes, our first task is to understand ourselves, to strive to become intelligible synthesis, not necessarily a system. Experience is paramount. Life has the priority. Praxis always leads. Our life is the foundation of all our thoughts. We may later come back to this issue of identity at a later stage from a different perspective. The second point. However factual and hence significant his biological link is, Panicker holds his symbolic relationship at a higher level. That is to say, he prefers not only to define himself as a global citizen, but more often as a religious person simultaneously at home with Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and secularism. In a text dealing with interreligious dialogue, he writes, I left as a Christian, I found myself as a Hindu, and I returned as a Buddhist without having ceased to be a Christian. And again in another text, personally I have discovered secularity after having experienced to the full, I would dare say, the most severe Roman Catholic tradition. And I have discovered Buddhism after having plunged into the most strict Vedantic orthodoxy. In a word, my Christian identity has led me to understand and accept what I call secularity. And my Hindu identity has equally conducted me to the Anatman insight. Panicker is hence, in his own words, a Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, secularist, all at the same time. And that is why he is referred to as a person of multiple belongings. The different colors or layers of his identity are visible, active, and coexistent in the same person. This self-understanding is already a challenge for anyone to comprehend Panicker's intellectual pursuits, especially his conceptions of religion and the goal of human life, because all of them come up in his writings in different manner. But let me also mention another daunting challenge in dealing with Panicker's writings. To the outside world, Panicker is an intellectual, a polyglot, who writes in 6 languages and speaks more than that. And above all, a scholar of religious cultures. But he is also someone who combines the theory in a very practical manner, so that theorizing, theorein, they would say in Greek, the theorizing becomes a lifestyle, an intellectual pattern already known and practiced in the ancient Greece, as well as in Rome, even during the time of Augustine. Especially in the West, this lifestyle has become a model for monasticism or mysticism. And we do discover here strong links with the classical Hindu hermitage, the life of the yogis praised by Kalidasa, for example. Hence, when Panicker refers to himself as a seeker of wisdom, or when his perspectives regarding other religions are taken to be mystical pluralism, He does approve of it, but at the same time emphasizes that he is a yogi, a monk, arhat, and a communist all at the same time. So biological double belonging, religious and cultural multiple belonging characterize Panicker as a person. Even his name testifies to it, because at first he used to publish his books under the name Raimundo, that is a normal Spanish name, but now he uses the Catalan form Raimon. So in a certain sense, from Catalan he has gone back, from Spanish he has gone back to the Catalan form. So no single adjective describes him adequately, except perhaps the demonic term legion. And daimonic, in its literal original sense, daimonion, is Panicker's thought. That is to say, it is creative and dynamic. Consequently, his thought can and need be related to patterns of thought spanning various centuries, and I shall attempt to point out solely two of those, the archaic and the renascent. Both these aspects would take us to the religious cultural complex which mainly constitutes Panicker's thought. Let me hence start with the archaic, and I shall come back to the renascent in the conclusion. Cosmotheandrism constitutes the foundation of all Panicker's thought, although it has been inadvertently present in his writings from the very beginning, and it has been spelled out in detail in his 1993 book, the so-called Cosmotheandric Experience. But I would like to introduce you to this through a myth. Here is a myth from Mozambique, from Africa. Early in the morning, the fisherman went out to fish at the big river that flows into the sea. From dawn to dusk, he worked hard and had a good catch for the day. At the day's end, he gathered all the fish he caught in 3 baskets, placed them on his head, and walked back home. In order to reach the home, he had to pass through a forest inhabited by wild animals. On the way, he was met by a crocodile, which friendly greeted, "Good day, sir." The fisherman did not respond and sped up in the direction of his village. The day after, he was summoned by the village chief because the crocodile has complained that the man has behaved impolitely. As to explain himself for this rude behavior, the man responded as follows: "I had with me only 3 baskets full of fish. One was destined to my wife, the other to my children, and the third to my parents. I did not have anything more, and hence I did not respond to the crocodile. The chief and his council pronounced him right. Because they said he conducted himself like a man, which was expected of him. And also the crocodile agreed to the judgment of the village council." So this is of course a myth describing an event taking place at a time when humans and animals live together in harmony and understand each other. According to the native interpretation, the myth describes the relationship and responsibility of the human person, the network of relations around him. The fisherman's first relation and responsibility is towards his wife, with whom he shares his life. It is a relationship of mutuality, argumentative, understanding, etc. We may call it dialectical relationship if you want. The second relation and responsibility is towards his children. Although from an anthropological perspective it is a relationship of mutuality, it entails a special kind of responsibility on the part of the parent, for the simple reason that the children continue the humanity, and are dependent on the parent. We may call it dialogical relationship. The third relation and responsibility described in the myth is towards the parents of the fisherman. It again has the characteristic of mutuality, but goes beyond it in as much as it is incommensurable. Incommensurability as posited for the fisherman. Incommensurability is posited, for the fisherman has received gratuitously his life from the parents. He cannot at all compensate them for that by giving life back to the parents. He cannot be the parents of his parents. You might perhaps remember in the Ramayana narrative where it is told about when children come to Achyuta, then Achyuta reacts. I remember it only from the Malayalam version. Achyutane kam neram kochurodi olichudini arigatani olikin neram ayyo ennu paranju thudangi. Then they say, why? Because the reason is that mani poyaladu mundakiram, tuni poyaladu mundakiram, pranan poyal. That is the question. That is to say, when everything is lost, you can regain it. But when you lose your life, who can give it to you? See, here is that aspect there. So there is the three kinds of relationships mentioned here. Dialectical, dialogical, and incommensurable are necessary to live the life as a human person. Further, according to the myth, it also represents the human person's responsibility to the three generations he belongs to, namely the present, future, and past generations. The responsibilities and relationships may have much in common, but are also distinct with regard to each generation. The myth thus situates the human person in the universe he or she lives in. It centers him or her in the world and orients him in life by providing an awareness of reality. It is the key term, awareness of reality. So what has this mythical awareness to do with Panikkar's cosmotheandric vision? I will try to be fast. First of all, the cosmotheandrism proposed by Panicker highlights the interrelationship between three dimensions, all of which together constitute the reality. And these three dimensions, according to Panicker, are the so-called dimension of theos, anthropos, and cosmos. So I go directly into that to cut short a little bit. Theos Theos, the dimension of the divine, for Panicker, is both transcendent and immanent. It transcends itself and it is unfathomable. The central aspect with regard to this dimension is that it is the infinite inexhaustibility of any real being. What does he want to say with that? Panicker wants to tell us that the divine is that dimension of more and better for the world as much as for the human being. Neither man nor the cosmos is a finished product. They are in expansion, which indicates the divine dimension built in them. That is to say, you and I are never finished beings. We are always projected towards the future. We have projects, we have never reached it yet. So what is that we can reach to that is perhaps that we still do not know? It is an immense possibility that is there. There is a project there. Anyone who is here may become, let us say in simpler terms, the Prime Minister of Canada. It is a possibility. It is never discarded. It exists there. So that possibility makes you, from Panicker's perspective, an infinite person, inexhaustible. And that is the whole argument of this theos, this aspect of theos. So let us go to the second dimension. In describing the second dimension, namely anthropos, Panicker notes that man is not the isolated individual, but a person with the sky above, the earth below, and his fellow beings all around. And what characterizes the second dimension is the consciousness. And here Panicker is a little bit more radical. He tells us that, first of all, every being is linked to consciousness. That means every being is thinkable. See, every being is thinkable, hence connected to human awareness. The fact that the reality is thought by man, argues Panicker, the entire field of reality lives humanized in him. So, since I think of you, you already live in me. Later, we'll see the further development of that. If we never think of the other person, if there isn't any more memory of the person remaining in us, then that person does not anymore exist. And you see the meaning of all the rituals, all the ceremonies, especially the Hindu rituals. So you will see the key to that. Now, Panicker's point here is that this is the human dimension. It may also be called the dimension of consciousness, for whatever consciousness may be, it is manifested in and through man. Now, let us go to the third dimension. The third dimension is called the dimension of the cosmos. Cosmos here is understood as materiality and temporality. We may say that it indicates the cosmic dimension constitutive of reality. It is part of it. So it is not an addition or superstructure. So I quote Panicker how he explains it. The cosmos is not just matter and convertible energy. The cosmos has life and, like man, a dimension of plus, a share in the divine dynamism. I am saying that there are no disembodied souls or disincarnated gods. Just as there is no matter, no energy, no spatio-temporal world without divine and conscious dimensions. A purely immaterial being is as much an abstraction as an exclusively material one. So that is where Panicker brings in his cosmotheandric perspective. So in brief, what Panicker proposes is a holistic and integral insight into the nature of all what is. In simple terms, we may say that the cosmotheandric vision highlights the inseparable interdependence of nature, humans, and the divine, which, according to Panicker, has been ignored and is being ignored by Western patterns of thought and praxis. For the concept of inert matter, emphasis on reason, and the unwarranted confidence set on technology have widened the gap between humans and the nature, called into question the human fulfillment envisaged by various cultures. This Western pattern of thought promotes rationalism, blindly believes in technique, and eventually destroys the nature which sustains all our life. Since this is a highly selective and inherently destructive pattern of thought, one has the obligation to rediscover the wisdom of humanity. One of its sources is India, which, among others, also provided Panicker with the inspiration to propose a cosmotheantric vision. So we shall now move on to the next aspect, where we shall talk about the interconnected universes and his pluralism. In this regard, I would like to bring in three considerations. First of all, Panicker reminds us that often our understanding of religion is very restricted. For we identify it with its sociological manifestation, whereas it is also doctrinal, sacramental, and mystic. So Panicker would better try to understand religion as spirituality. Spirituality here means one typical way of handling the human condition. It represents man's basic attitude vis-a-vis his ultimate end. One religion, in fact, may include several spiritualities, because spirituality is not directly bounded with any dogma or institution. So when he refers to Christianity, for example, he would say that from the sociological perspective, we may speak about Christianity or Christendom. From the sacramental or doctrinal perspective, we may speak about Christian faith, and from the mystic perspective, we may speak about Christianness. So that is to say, there is a possibility of seeing in the religion, religion 1, religion 2, religion 3. And Panicker tells us that even though such a distinction is acceptable, no one reaches religion 3 except passing through religion 1 and religion 2. So he is not trying to eliminate, let us say, the sociological or the institutional component, but he says that there is a certain hierarchy within this conception of religion, and nobody is entitled to remain in one level. You have to move from one level to the other, or you have to make a synthesis of all these three levels. That is where he is arguing. And in this perspective, he analyzes the various spiritualities that is existing in Christianity as well as in Hinduism. So in Christianity, we might perhaps, or in general, we might distinguish the three types of spiritualities, which he calls iconolatry or idolatry, and then personalism and mysticism. And these three types of spiritualities, he would say, are correlational, are equivalent with the three margas of Hinduism: the Karma Marga, Bhakti Marga, and Jnana Marga. So here we already come across what we call a kind of correlationship, which we would call equivalence between Hinduism and Christianity. And so his main argument is that in studying the religions, our main concern should be to go to these equivalences, for which Panicker has invented another neologism, which is called homeomorphic equivalence. Yeah. What does it mean, homeomorphic equivalence? Just to put it in simpler terms. Homeomorphic equivalence, first of all, can be simply explained that they are at least functionally of the same level. The simplest way to understand is to look at the transportation system. We can move from one place to the other either by car or by train or by plane. All of them serve the same function. So we could say they are functionally equivalent. But are they identically equivalent? No. So that is what the religions are. That is what the spiritualities also are. So how do we manage them? By bringing them together, by synthesizing them. So not eliminating my car and now I'm going only by aeroplane. So you see, so there is a synthesis. That is what is expected of us, Panicker would say. Now, from this perspective, Panicker would tell us that the central attitude of us humans should be an attitude with regard to religions and cultures, an attitude of pluralism. So I'll move on to that. In the attitude of pluralism, we have the possibility of distinguishing various kinds of pluralisms and considering that these pluralisms would promote tolerance and openness, etc., and therefore they are good. Panicker says, of course they are good, but the point is that when we talk about pluralism, we should not limit our verses to that. We need to go further. Pluralism for him is a basic human attitude. It is an attitude which helps us to acknowledge that there are other windows, there are other perspectives. Pluralism does not require you to look through all the windows or even to manage all the windows or all the perspectives, but simply to acknowledge that there are other perspectives existing. If other perspectives are existing, then of course you will come to the awareness that you will have no right to make any absolute statements. See? So pluralism is this personal anthropological attitude with which the human person has to live. And therefore, the acceptance of pluralism is necessary, and the pluralistic attitude as a human awareness, according to Panicker, has been challenged by science as well as the Western pattern of thought. So there we come to the last and third part, the plenitude of man. So in the plenitude of man, I wonder if you have, if any of you have gave attention to my emphasis on using the term man, and nobody has clearly the eyes. But I wanted to say that for Panicker,
Panicker was born in 1918. So we forgive him if he...
But that's an interesting point, but that is the point. That is not the point for Panicker. Because Panicker, whenever he uses the term, he always writes it with a capital M. So to point out that man is not the simple chemical combination that the rationalistic thought or the scientific thought tells you. Man is more than that. As we have earlier mentioned, there are so much possibilities there. So who are you? And therefore, in connection with one of his criticisms, he quotes this anecdote when a US scientist came to India, to the Himalayas, and saw there some of the Swamis and criticizing them, the miserable manner they were living, and he told them that they have to be uplifted. And he gave them the example that, you see, we have sent a man to moon. And then the yogi immediately responded, do you know the man whom you sent? Knowing the man is the important thing. Do you know whom you sent? No. If you do not know the person, you have no right, or you have no possibility of establishing any relationship with that. It is simply the abstract man. So, of whom are you talking about? So that is the point here. So Panica tells us that man is nothing other than, as in the Hindu scriptures would say, the Purusha. Purusha evedam sarvam. That is the point here. If Purusha is evedam sarvam, so in that case, what is the plenitude of man? We are called to be not only microcosms, we are called to be microtheos, little gods, if you want to say. There is an element of materiality, timeliness, temperaturity, which is within us, and there is also that element of divineness within us, which also we have to reach and we have to integrate, and that is what we are called for. So when it comes to the plenitude of man, this is the main thing. So Panicker will tell us that all of this we can reach only if we have we have what he would call a cosmic confidence. That is to say, a confidence which cannot be proved scientifically, but the confidence that we as human beings are known in a network of relations. And recognizing that, acknowledging that we have the possibility of integrating ourselves in this universe. So before we end, I would like to, as conclusion, I would like to come to one or two remarks.
That's the point which
Here, in this conclusion, I would like to remind you that when Panicker analyzes the history and the thought of humanity, he tells us that we can at least discover three significant moments. This he calls chirological moments, which is the Latin term which simply can be translated as the auspicious moments. So these auspicious moments are characterized in the history, first of all, by the archaic thought, which presents a unity manner of thinking about all that exists. And we have moved from that archaic pattern of thought where the unity is emphasized, and we have introduced a humanistic, scientific pattern of thought at the present time when we live. And there we are always looking for the differentiation, and therefore trying to know and overcome things. Or let us say manipulate things and calculate things. And these two kinds of thoughts, Panicker says, are good, but they are not enough. We need integration. And this integration is what he is suggesting by proposing the cosmotheandric perspective, which will connect the unitive dimension with the dimension of differentiation without losing the unity. So what is nothing other than an Advaitic perspective. That is the center of his perspective. So it is the Advaitic perspective, which Panicker says, which can really give us some insight into how the solutions can be approached. And India is for that very much equipped. And that is one of his arguments. The second point that I simply wanted to indicate is that this idea, one of the other sources of this idea comes also from the Renaissance, especially from the philosopher Marsilio Ficino, who argued that when we look at the whole universe, we will find the universe as consisting of 5 elements, and in the middle of which the man stands. And the man connects all these elements. Why and how? Not by the reason, he says, by ratiocinatio. That is the word at that time they use. It is not ratiocinatio. It is nowadays translated as discursive reason, or the process of thought. It is something which takes into consideration the feelings and the arguments, and therefore puts them together. So that is the capability of man, and Ficino therefore argued that perhaps man stands in the center of the universe. That was his argument, because he has the ratiocinatio. So I would say that Panicker's incentives are such, if these incentives has enabled us to start with, let us say, a synthetic lifestyle, that is yet to be seen.
Thank you very much. That was a very enlightening talk. And when you, I have a lot of questions, but I'm not going to. I'm going to open it to the floor. But I'd just like to say one or two thoughts that occurred to me when you were talking about knowing the man. Reminded me of a great Tamil sage, Ramana Maharishi, and his reply to anything anyone asked him was, ask yourself, Nanya, who am I? And it is from that you will realize everything. And anyway, now we'll please, any questions?
Is that the concept of Purusha you mentioned? Is it the same or equivalent to Tattwamasi?
It is
That the one.
Tattwamasi.
Tattwamasi, that the one.
Yeah. The concept of Purusha and Tattwamasi, Panicker would say, are different perspectives of the same reality. When we talk about Purusha, we are now practically concentrating our attention on the human dimension. And the human dimension has got very great possibilities. And the Tattwamasi emphasizes that in this human dimension, the other pole to which we relate to is the divine. So in the Tattwamasi, practically that divine pole is also emphasized. That is the only difference. The other comment that I wanted to bring in relation to the Tamil Maharshi is simply this. That is to say, in every normal life, especially in India, among the common people, there is always this question which sometimes is expressed in, at least in the water of Kunchanambiya in Kerala, through the question, Kadi Lola, who is the more beautiful? In a certain sense, the question is there, Ka, who are you? But it is, and that is interesting aspect, this questioning of oneself, who you are, can be approached from the various perspectives. So when you ask the question from this manner, Ka, you can put it from the perspective of the art, you can put it from the perspective of your material possessions, you can put it from the perspective of your intellectual qualities, etc. So, but that question is always present there. And that is what Panica emphasizes, that you cannot discard the so-called common people. They have got, he would say, the telluric awareness. That is the term he uses. The awareness of living with the earth, which gives them that they are never separate or alienated.
I'd like to want you to comment on the practical implications of this kind of thought, and sort of make it relevant for the Canadian experience, so to speak. Now, one of the ways in Canadian society that we are trying to bring about integration, so to speak, is through the policy of so-called multiculturalism. Now, if you are following the debates, now multiculturalism is under scrutiny now, under critical analysis now. This notion of bringing out integration itself is sort of, people are wondering as to whether it is possible through this route of multiculturalism policies and so on and so forth. And listening to you, you speak hope, and probably it's possible, but I want you to comment.
Okay, thank you. Now, I give you the Panicker's perspective. What he tells us is that if we look for multiculturalism as a solution of our diversity, we are not going to get it. Multiculturalism is necessary to acknowledge that there is diversity. And diversity needs to be acknowledged. Now, the standpoint of Panicker is that we do not have to reduce all diversities into a unity. And that is the tendency of, you would call, rationalistic thought. So there is, in a certain sense, an in-between sphere. Sphere where practically we do not know actually if this is really true or not. Possibly true, but it is helpful for me, for my particular life. I have lived so much, so therefore I have that confidence. So to have this suspense in your life and live with that suspense is a challenge for me. And that is what he says is the first step that we have to do, not to look for concrete, definitive solutions.
I have a question.
No, Rita.
Okay. This chaotic dimension of Panicker if I simplify it, can I say that universities within all of us, that is the triadic dimensions, the theos and anthropos and consciousness, all these things. So can I simplify it and say that every human being is part of the university?
Yes and no. In the first sense, we all participate in the various dimensions. So therefore we could say that somehow or other the universe is in us. But the other point that is important is that these dimensions are also independent. They cannot be reduced to one dimension. And that Panikkar's criticism to Hinduism says that at times there is a tendency of reducing all the dimensions into the consciousness. As also in the same Western pattern of thought, there is a tendency of reducing everything to the dimension of the materiality. And he says that none of such kind of reductions will really do, because they are looking for the one unity. So to put it in better terms, we could say that the so-called monotheism, the so-called mono search is not going to give any positive result. We have to detach ourselves from that mono search and then agree upon that there is diversity, and the interrelationship really keeps the diversity together.
You mentioned that to reach a destination you could take a bus or a train or a plane. It will serve the same purpose and they are considered to be equivalent. Similarly, Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism are equivalent. I did not hear anything about, unless I missed it, what is Panikkar's view on atheism and agnosticism. An atheist would say, I don't recognize a divine, I'm all there is. And agnostics will say, I don't know, I know me. What was Panikkar's view on those?
Panikkar's view of atheism, from this perspective, he would simply say that a human person or man is essentially religious. Why is the man is essentially religious? From the perspective that we have, Panicker has explained, there is this dimension of at least search for ineffability. So you do not have to reduce religion into a belief in a particular system. You can really be a religious person if you have this consciousness of the order of the universe, and that order of the universe is reflected in your concrete life. So that aspect of the Rida, I could not touch it, but that is an aspect which he also emphasizes very much in relation to the cosmic confidence. So he would say that atheist, as well as a religious person, is a confident person. If he is not a confident person, he is unable to live even in the daily life. As Augustine used to present it as an example, for example, if you would go and get into a cart, and then you at least takes it for granted that the cart driver knows how to drive the cart. It's a confidence, it's a trust. It can be that you may be somehow or other cheated, but without such kind of trust, life is impossible. And the atheist person reflects this anthropological cosmic confidence.
And what was his view on agnostics?
The same.
Okay. Thank you.
Because it's only a rational manner of looking more about it.
Only it's a comment and question. I like the that one cannot reduce it to simple answers. However, on the other hand, you say human beings are religions, and religion means seeking an answer. People a man by nature likes to have answers. It takes a lot of maturity to live without answers and to be able to take in all kinds of various aspects of being cosmos and all various things that you mentioned. And that part of it is really an appealing thing to me, because it takes a tremendous amount of maturity to be able to live without answers in life. It produces a lot of anxiety. And by nature human being is not immortal, and therefore we want answers. Religion is such an attractive to you to have answers. It's not, in everything that we might have, but there are answers to the eternal anxiety.
Panica would tell us that every religion gives us answers, and they are good answers. But the only thing is that a religious person is also obliged to appropriate those answers by critically engaging with those answers. So he does not say that you should be uncritically simply gulp down everything that you get, because there in that case practically your personality is never expressed.
It's difficult for a common being to do that, and therefore, but it's something you aspire to. Yeah.
But the problem is that one of the problem of that question is that, I wouldn't say it's a problem, it's the issue is that when we think about religion, we are often confusing religion with the doctrines. We say that we believe in this, and according to Panicker, that is only one dimension of the religion. You could say that it is the religion too, if you want. Yeah. So that is where Panicker says that you have to accept that maybe certain persons do not go beyond that. If that is good for them, okay, let that be. You did say.
No, just a question of clarification. Given Panicker's rich diversity of being mixed race, mixed faith, mixed culture, multiple languages, let's say that Census Canada asked him what identity is. What would he say?
He has come to another aspect. I think I can give you some insights. What he first of all says is that the question of identity, first of all, refers to two things. When you say that I am such and such, we either refer to our singularity, that is to say what differentiates us from the other person. And secondly, the other persons, we would also refer to us as our individuality. Right. That is to say, what am I in relation to myself? Not taking into account all the other things, because you are Mr. Mukherjee. Yesterday you are Mukherjee, today also you are Mukherjee. So that is to say, but there is some difference. You don't take those differences into consideration and say that, therefore, here is the individual Mukherjee. See my point?
Right.
So there are two manners of referring to yourself as a person. So the identity can be taught either as singularity or individuality.
Fine.
Now, when we use these terms in the scientific terminology, these are the only manner which they are talking about. But they are not placing emphasis on your identity as a relationship. We call them relativity. That is to say, if you talk about Mukherjee as the person who is married to a certain person, who has such and such a son, who has been working there, who knows such and such, all the relationships are brought in. Practically there, your individuality and singularity are synthetically brought up. So that is what he calls the identity. So the Canadian identity will be this legion. So as I mentioned in the very beginning, it is a daimonic identity.
Oh.
But if he was an Advaitin,
Yeah.
he would simply say, "Oh, that's that, I am that."
Yeah.
Because he would not recognize the material at all and go straight to the divine you. You are your soul.
That is correct, and that is where Panica differs from the classical Advaitic interpretation. You are right.
Actually, some years ago, there was a slogan in Canada, "Who is a Canadian? It's you and me." You know, even post office, even
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It's you and me.
Yeah.
Well, it's who is a Canadian? No, what is the hallmark of a Canadian?
Yeah, what is
Like,
Canada?
Americans are, as American as apple pie. In Canada, it's as Canadian as possible under the circumstances.
Yeah, now, Panica would say that Canadian is that person who relates to, who is related to. in these various enterprises that is taken by the Canada. And if you shun yourself from many of them, then of course you become a very lean Canadian.
We have one more question.
What is Panicker's identity as such a person? Seems to me a bit confusing.
That's what.
He talks a lot about pluralism. He tells a lot of. He gives us a vast version of knowledge, but at this stage of his life, he himself seems to be a bit confused whether he lives his pluralism.
His identity he referred to as this quadruple identity of the religious perspective. Person, a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, and a secularist. And he makes a little differentiation there. He would tell us that the first two identities, Christian and Hindu, are more or less of the same level, but the other two identities are, let's say, attitudes he has accepted. He is sympathetic to, so he would call them as sub-identities. So it is a person who is related to these aspects, and that relationality is what constitutes his identity.
I think we have one. Is there one more question? Yes, I think Brian has one.
I just had a question on the role of meditation in Panicker's philosophy. How does meditation factor into what he's
Particular, there is an interesting book published by him called Christophany, the Manifestation of Christ, which is actually where he talks about Christ as a symbol, where the meditation is presented as one of the techniques, or let's say one of the insights that is shared by various religions. And he uses one mystical phrase by Saint Teresa of Avila, a Spanish mystic, and the phrase is this: search for you in me and search me in you. Búscame en mí, búscate en mí. Search for me in you and search for you in me. So that's it.